Okay, today we are going to be looking at how to render still frames from Maya and bring them into Premiere. Next one, we're going to go up here and change our camera to our current camera 1 and just scrub through to see how that looks. And then we're going to go up into render settings and the rendering menu. And these are going to give us access to the menus that we want. We're just going to peel that menu out so that it's there for us. And from there, we can also use the button to get to render settings. So we're going to be rendering in the Maya software rendering engine. If you choose to install and use Arnold, you're going to do so on your own. Do your own research, as it were. But we're going to be using Maya software. And there's a few settings in here that you're going to want to familiarize yourself with or just double check in order to make sure that you're set up correctly. You can render a single frame just to check out what the lighting looks like. Don't forget to turn off view transformation, just so you can see what the lighting is going to really look like in your scene for each still frame. And that'll give you a good idea of that. If you're going to use ray tracing, make sure to turn it on. And that's usually for your shadows there. And then the next couple things we're going to click through are the most important buttons in this part of the process. The first one is that you want to make sure you're using a PNG. You can also use other file types that are compatible like Targa or JPEG, but for our purposes we're going to be using PNG as our file type. After that, we need to change that from single frame. We're going to be rendering out multiple frames, so we're just going to go ahead and use name number dot extension. Most of these things we can leave alone, but when we get down here, we're going to decide how many frames we want to render out and from which camera. So we're going to use camera 1, and then we're just going to change the number of frames to 12, assuming that we would change camera to the second camera after frame 12. Then we're going to go ahead and look at our presets for resolution. We're going to go ahead and use HD 720. You do not need to render 4K footage. Nobody needs to see that, so we're just going to use 720 as our default. Obviously, you have options to go back and play around with that later if you want to test out what higher output looks like, but 720 will serve our purposes. From there, you want to make sure to turn on your film gate so that you can see what you're actually going to see in the rendered output. Notice that this rendered frame looks like what you get when you use film gate. Everything outside the film gate is not going to show up in your render. From there, once we actually get all those other settings up, we can use render sequence. We just clicked on that and we made sure that camera 1 is in fact the camera that we're going to use. And then we just click render sequence. And as you can see, it's going to start to output each frame one at a time. And if you look in the lower right hand corner, you can see the file names are being generated one by one. After that, now we get to go see where our files are. And if you click on our script editor, it will actually show you the file path, which you can just copy using Control-C. And you want to select everything except for the file name. Again, Control-C will copy it for you. And then if you paste that file path in here, it will show you all of the still image renders. Now I've got a number of other renders in here, as you can see, so this project has been used several times. The temp folder for images, which is in my profile. You can set up other directories as needed, but for our purposes, this will take care of it. So now that we know that we have all the still frames we want for our animation, we can open up Premiere. You're going to go ahead and click on New Project and Create. It's going to give you a warning about possibly replacing Untitled if you have a previous project. You want to be careful not to overwrite other work that you may have done. In my case, it doesn't matter. And so then the Premiere interface opens up. You can see a number of different frames in the interface, but the most important one is the import media blue button there. If you double click anywhere in that space, it will do the same thing, which is to open up a file explorer. And from there, we can go down to our files. Now there's a couple different ways to handle this. You'll notice over there you've got image sequence as an option. It will actually open up the sequence of images as a single entity in your asset manager, or you can select all of them and import them in individually. When you click open, you'll notice that over here in the project viewer, you've got all of these things, and you will want to sort them by their name so that they become sequential. And then you may have a one-off like that guy from a previous render, so you can just delete that or remove it. If you hit delete, it will go away. I click at the top there, and holding down shift, I click the last one, and that selects them all in sequence. If I hit play through, notice that it plays as you would expect it to play, but there's an important setting that you need to go over before you get going, because if you don't do this first, it's going to import them in with the wrong number of frames per individual image. Now we're just testing to see that our output was consistent with what we wanted, and it is. But what we need to double check when you first open Premiere, you might as well go in here in the Preferences Timeline section. You want to change the still image default duration to 1 frame, not 5 seconds. The default is 5 seconds. If you forget to change this, it's going to screw up your output from Premiere. It's not going to be at the right time signature. The other one that you're going to look at in sequence settings is you're going to change from 29.97 to 24 frames per second. And now your playback should be consistent. Go ahead and scrub through the timeline a couple of times just to check and see. You can hit the plus and minus key to zoom in and out of the frames that you have, so you can kind of get an idea of how that works. You could add an audio track if that's something you wanted to add down there below the video tracks. And now we're going to go ahead and go to Export Media from the File menu. Things you want to check on: make sure the file type is set correct, which is H.264 or an MP4 format. Check to see what the location is. That's where the video output will be. And just check to see video, audio, and effects and metadata are selected. Not that some of those are absolutely needed, but you can kind of see or get an idea by playing back here in your preview section what that video output's going to look like. And then you're going to click on the export button. Now, because my video is so short, that happened pretty quickly. But if we go to the output location and we look in here, we can see that Principles, with that long name, it's named something, has now output an MP4. And this is the file that you will submit for your final project in your final project folder, along with your Maya file and any material files or other necessary dependencies that you have in your setup. That would include, if you have sound, you want to put that in there. If you want to put your Premiere file in your project folder, that's okay, but it's not necessary. But the most important thing is to get that video file into the project folder for submission for your final project.